Hello, welcome back to Tech and AI Live London. Now, in our next keynote, embracing AI to bring life-changing drugs to patients faster. Our guest now is Lisa Moneymaker, Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer at Saama. Hello, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us. Really good to see you.
Fantastic.
Well, look, straight over to you for your keynote presentation.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here at Tech and AI Live. And as we said, the goal today is really to talk about how changes in technology, how advancements in artificial intelligence can really change what it means to bring medicine, which is really what we're talking about, to you faster, because really we can all be patients at any time in our lives. As you said, my name's Lisa Moneymaker. I work for a company called Saama. Our focus is to build software as a service products that help clinical development. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in just a minute. But we bring data and analytics together with artificial intelligence to bring really next generation technology into the advancement of what it means to bring those life-saving treatments into patients' hands safely and effectively. So we know across all industries, not just in my own, that there has been a data explosion over, the last recent years. Everything from the way that our cars collect data about us through banking and what it means to interact with media, again, all the way through to healthcare. We've gone from being able to collect a little bit of data, and usually on a paper-based form, about individuals, about the way they live, about their behaviors, all the way through to an ongoing, ever-present data collection. And what that means for then what we can do with that data, not just from how we store it, to how we process it, to how we make decisions about it, has fundamentally changed. And I think this continues to drive the different advancements that we see in machine learning and artificial intelligence, because we are constantly looking for ways to process this more efficiently. And healthcare is no different. When we think about what it means to bring a clinical trial, and I'm just going to take 2 seconds because this is a wide variety audience, to introduce clinical trials to you, to help give some context to some of the ideas that I'm going to be talking about. If there's one thing that the COVID era changed about my industry and about the way that we interact with people who maybe aren't a part of our industry, is that it really brought it front of mind. Finally, what we do. Finally, I could talk to my parents about what it is that I do for a living, because not everyone was aware of what clinical trials were before then. And then all of a sudden it was in the news and we were all talking about it. But basically, when we think about this idea, you probably heard of research and development within clinical trials. Research is when we are looking for new treatments, new molecules, things that could become drugs or things that could become medical devices. And then once we think that we've got a pretty good idea, they enter the clinical trial phase. And there are multiple phases across this, and lots of drugs make it into a phase 1 trial. They make it in through animal testing and then into, to early investigation with humans. But then we slowly start to weed them out. And ultimately, the number of drugs that make it into what we call a phase 3 trial, or the late stage trials that most people are familiar with, is very, very small. And then ultimately, only a select few make it through approval and into the hands of patients. And this becomes a long, drawn out process. For many drugs, this takes decades. When we think about the advancements of what we were able to do during the COVID-19 era, we moved from, decades to be able to get drugs to market to we were able to accelerate these new therapies into patients' hands within a year. And a lot of people and a lot of money came together to make that happen, to solve a global pandemic. But that's not the norm. But it has been our goal to see how we can make that look a lot more like the norm. How can we bring different technologies and different advancements to bear to say, can we move safely and effectively through these phases faster, through approvals faster, to be able to get the patients the drugs that they need at the time that they need them. So this is fundamentally how a clinical trial works. And we're going to focus sort of today on that phase 3 area. And ultimately within that, on a phase that a process that we call clinical development. That's where patients are visiting their physician's office. They're interacting with doctors and site coordinators to be able to help them understand things like their medical history and what else is going on in their life, to receive a treatment, to collect data about how that's going, so that ultimately we can make a decision about whether that treatment they were on changes the outcome for that patient. And when we think about the data that's collected there, so if you go back, 10 and 20 years in terms of what it meant to go to a physician's office, they were probably taking notes on a paper form. Maybe some were starting to use a computer to collect some of that. But just like in other industries, this has exploded within clinical trials. We now have everybody's wearing a watch of some sort that collects data. We have continuous glucose monitors. We have an explosion in the number of labs that we can collect. We have imaging data that we can collect. And then we have those basic healthcare forms. All of this data coming together creates really a web of data where it's not just, did the physician check your heart rate and your blood pressure and record it and there's one entry, but we could have lots of different pieces of information interacting with one another. And that creates challenges in what it means then to be able to make sense of all of that data. It's time and resource intensive to look through it all. We can't analyze it as quickly as if we were looking at just one or two paper forms. There's potential within that large amount of data to miss a signal that might tell us that there's a safety concern to be worried about. When the data is that complex, it can lead to delays in what it means to complete the trial. There's the risk that if we haven't managed the quality of that data, if it's coming through, that we could be submitting data to regulators that they might say, this is not up to standard. You need to go back and take another look at this. And that ultimately that means that that drug application could be denied. And the goal is that for any treatment that makes sense for patients, that is revolutionary and changing the way that they can receive healthcare, that is safe and that is effective, we want those applications to be approved. And so we want to be able to minimize these risks and really be able to suss out whether or not it is effective and it is safe. And so this is where the different sorts of technologies that we're going to talk about today can come to bear. They can help us analyze that data. They can help us aggregate the data. It can help us clean the data, because there's different steps. There's understanding, is the data correct? Did someone miskey it in? Did we have a problem with a particular sensor or with an image that was taken? And then once we know it's clean, what can it tell us about the trial? Can it tell us about something that that patient is experiencing? And both of those are important to understanding the overall progression of that trial. So everyone's asking themselves, how can AI impact the way that they do business? And we're still investigating this, and this is something that's changing rapidly. I'm fortunate enough to be working with a company that has a long history in bringing machine learning models and bringing artificial intelligence into the way that we can analyze data. So this is not new to us, but the exciting pieces are how rapidly it's changing. There are problems that we can solve today that we couldn't solve 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Every time my team is researching new things, they're saying, hey, remember that problem we were looking at that we couldn't solve because of compute time, or we couldn't solve because of the math behind it? Now we're having breakthroughs through sort of this collaborative effort that's going on and through individual research that are making new things possible. And it's a really exciting time to be working with large data sets. But ultimately, when we think about specifically the clinical trial industry in healthcare, it is a highly regulated industry, and it should be. We are working with human lives. We are working with the safety and the treatments of those that you love, and we take that very, very seriously. So when we think about the ways that machines and computers and all of this intelligence can help us, we break it up into sort of these three different levels. There's this idea that you can have supporting analytic tools that help support your decision making, but a human is in control at all levels of this. An example of this might be, I can use technology to take data and map it into a chart that might help me see data in a more consumable way for me. But all it's doing is it's really presenting something to me. Another way that we can bring that in is really to augment the people. So let's say then, instead of just a presentation on a graph, I could go in with a machine learning algorithm, and I could look at historic data and make a prediction or a recommendation about the trend of what's happening. So rather than just showing you numbers on a graph, I could point out certain numbers and tell you why, as a machine learning algorithm, why I think that they're relevant for you. But ultimately, I stop there, and the human is incorporated. We call this human in the loop, to refine what that performance could look like, to decide whether that's a good recommendation, and ultimately decide what the action might be that we take upon it. The third level is where we really get into autonomous decision-making by machines. So the technology moves all the way from, I have the data, I can analyze it, I can make a recommendation, but I'm going to do that recommendation. I'm going to take action upon it. And this is where we get into autonomous decision-making, some independentness about that. For my industry, for clinical trials, for healthcare, because of our regulated nature, because how important clinical decision-making is, because of the controls around it, we tend to stay in boxes 1 and 2. It's going to be some time, if ever, before we get into really autonomous decision-making by these sorts of algorithms in the way that we conduct business. And this is good for us. It helps us maintain controls within the system. It helps us make sure that our human intelligence plays a critical part in those final decision-making. And it really allows us to maintain sort of the validated state of what it means to say we have control of this trial. We understand why decisions were made, and we know that the human intelligence we put into it was a critical part of that. So when we design systems, this is where we're stopping, and it makes for really interesting workflows in terms of the way that systems can offer information back to the users. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to give you some examples of how artificial intelligence and generative AI is used in life sciences and specifically in clinical development today. So as we take a look at those, if we think about this idea that artificial intelligence and machine learning are really good at looking at historic data sets or ongoing data sets and making predictions. So if I know how trials have run in the past, if I know how patients have tended to respond to certain treatments or certain indications maybe within their lab, so if you have certain lab values, what does that tend to mean about you? I can then feed those into an algorithm, which can help me predict the behavior of patients within an ongoing trial. And some examples of this, and I'll explain the terminology. So early withdrawal, this is when someone removes themselves from the trial voluntarily. Similarly, with early termination, they are extracted from the trial. They're no longer going to participate. This isn't great for us. We want people to stay within the trial. It helps us collect the data about them. Adverse events are where something happens to you in response to a treatment. Sometimes it's because of the treatment you took. Sometimes it could be because of something else that's going on in your life. But anytime there's an adverse event, we want to investigate it. And you can have serious and non-serious ones. But by looking at the data and noting response patterns, we can predict what a patient will probably do in response to that. And again, we're not going to do anything about that directly as an algorithm, but what we can do is we can surface it up to a human who can do something about it. So we bring it to that employee who knows what these signals look like, who knows what this information could mean in the context of the trial. And they can decide if something different should be done. Should we change the structure of the trial? Should we change the dose that we're giving certain patients? Do we need to make an adjustment? These are all decisions that can be made based on a prediction that moves through that vast history of data and is able to look at something. So let's give an example of what that might look like in real life. So again, we've got historic trial data, we have the ongoing data from this current trial, and the AI is looking at it and it's saying, you have 15 patients that are at potential risk of early termination due to the lab results I'm seeing in response to their last dose. So based on this, if we can surface that information directly to the trial executor, they can look through that data and then decide, again, if that corrective action is required. Now, I don't just want to hold you here at sort of this hypothetical example. I want to take you into what that could actually look like in a system. So I'm going to give you a very fast demo, just about a minute here, that shows you not the algorithms themselves, but how they come into play. So we have a concept called smart suggestions, and this is basically where our AI is coming into play to frame up for someone who's using our systems what this could mean within their life. So here we're seeing, again, just like that example, we have an early withdrawal as predicted for 4 subjects. These are patients within the trial with an 89.5% confidence score. So this is based on historic data and what they're seeing. Now, not only am I going to tell you that that's a possibility, now I'm going to bring you directly to who are those 4 patients. I'm going to let you interrogate them more in that style of phase 1 of what we were looking at. Let me give you the information, put it in a really understandable graph form, and let you interrogate who those are. And ultimately, the decision making, again, then sits with that healthcare professional who knows the context and can understand that better. So we're moving people from a prediction to an action that they can take. Another example that we have, so we talked about this idea that there's sort of two phases of what we might be looking at in the data. There's, is the data clean? And then there's, what is it telling us about the trial? So we just examined sort of what is it telling us about the trial. In this case, let's talk a little bit about more of, is that data proper and correct? And this is a huge time spend and a huge time suck for companies that are working in the process of trying to move the treatments from investigation into patients' hands. Is, again, we're dealing with a lot of data, and there is a huge human element that is going in and basically just checking, did we collect it correctly? If you think about one simple, for example, Excel form that you're looking at that maybe contains all the data in the trial, it's not actually too hard to say, is this proper and correct? Is it within certain bounds? Is the blood pressure reading what we would expect it to say? Is the heart rating 300 as opposed to 78 or 92 or something like that? Those are easy to understand at the point of time, and even at the point of time of collection. And we can send it back, for example, if the doctor fat fingers and puts in 300 for your heart rate. That's a pretty easy, we might call it an edit check at the time of capture to say, that's probably not right, check that again. But when we start to get more complex, and again, if we think back to all those modalities of data collection, where we might say that some of your data is coming in by your physician or your nurse who's putting it into the system, some of your data is coming in from a lab that's coming from at a different time collection, and it's not processed till later. Some of it is being fed by your continuous glucose monitor. Some of it is coming in from an image that came from an MRI that you had done. All of that data, there is no single point of entry to say, here the data is not correct. So we've got to look at it in the aggregate, which means we're looking at it at a later time, but we're able to draw more interesting correlations. Through that, we can do things, if we're using a powerful algorithm, to see duplicate lab tests, to be able to tell if there's missing data, that the preponderance of the data collection tells us that the patient should have this data collection, but I've got one who's missing a piece of data. It's not just that it hasn't been put in yet, but enough time has passed that I can tell it's actually missing. I can see that maybe there's been a medication discrepancy where they didn't fill in that there was probably a historic a historic drug that they had been taking. Maybe they've been on aspirin for the last 10 years, but that wasn't recorded in their medical history. But based on what I'm seeing in their labs, I can see evidence of that. And so that might be something where we would say there's likely a data correction or data collection that's missing. Or those adverse events that we talked about, sometimes they're recorded in multiple different ways by different physicians or different interaction points. And we could see that there might be an overlap in those, which means we're reporting them twice. So AI can help us process this vast amount of data by bringing different specialized algorithms to suggest that there's a potential data correction that needs to be made, and then ultimately surface to someone who can make the final decision. Now, the way that this comes across within a clinical trial is, for example, we might see that there's a duplicate data entry and say, we've got an entry of high blood pressure that's likely a duplicate entry versus something that someone else has already put in. We don't want to record those multiple times. Now, then our healthcare professional who's involved in this and reviewing those suggestions can say, yep, let's get that sent back to the physician's office and ask them, was this valid that there were two recorded, and get a reason why, or have them correct that at the source and get the right source data in, and now we can have the corrected data flow. So we get multiple people involved at this point. And this is a process that has always existed across the trials, that interplay between reviewers on the pharmaceutical company side and the physician's offices themselves that are conducting the trial. What we can do is we can speed them to recognition that there is likely a data problem here, and then we can improve the way that they interact with one another within that. So those are just a couple of examples of how bringing these different sorts of processes together and bringing AI to it can help us get these trials done, again, faster and safer. And ultimately, though, I want to bring that back to the why. We have a lot of different, as I said, data collections. There's a lot of old technologies that are available now that have been built up over the last 20 and 25 years of bringing technology into clinical trials. And ultimately, that's creating a lot of bottlenecks in the process. Our goal is not to just, help companies get, through this process faster because they want to save money. The goal, if we look at the outsize, is how do we bring novel drug candidates, new and exciting treatments that can change the lives of you and your loved ones into the market faster to be able to do just that. And so the more places that we can smooth out this curve, where we can reduce manual processes, we can reduce quality errors and the time-consuming nature of identifying those, what that lets us get to is a smoother process of bringing those treatments to patients. Because ultimately, I promise you that everyone that is involved in clinical development and clinical research is ultimately concerned with how do we bring these life-changing treatments to patients. It's why we stay in this business. It's why we got in this business in the first place. It's what drives us every day to be in here looking for advancements and trying to work together to smooth out this process. And we know that with artificial intelligence, we have the ability to manage high volume data. We have the ability to surface those actionable insights into the hands of a qualified professional who can make those decisions. We can automate some of these processes that have become routine, but yet still involve manual intervention, and ultimately be able to monitor the quality of the data and the safety of those patients in real time. So thanks for letting me be here with you today. Thanks for joining us and learning more about technology through this conference and being able to better understand different industries and what some of these impacts are. We would love to continue the conversation with you if you want to hear more about Saama, and I would love to take your questions now if you have any.
Lisa, thanks. Absolutely incredible insights there from your particular industry. What I picked up particularly was that you're using AI for clinicians to make clinical decisions and not for AI to take those decisions, which of course is supremely important when it comes to human health. And something else you touched upon that other speakers today have touched upon is about quality data. Just set out what you say is quality data for you and what you do about it if you don't have quality data.
Yeah, it's as I mentioned in the talk, it's a big, I don't want to call it a problem. It's a big opportunity for improvement within our industry. You know, there's a high focus on quality at every point when it comes to healthcare. Everyone is highly trained that you interact with. If you are a part of a clinical trial, everyone has an intense focus on that, but mistakes are made. And those mistakes, if not caught early, can actually, it's not just a matter of ultimately they get found. And we've had statistical programs for years. We capture those data problems. We capture the differences in trends at different physicians' offices to be able to identify if maybe there's a training issue going on or something that we need to correct for. But one of the things that AI gives us uniquely the ability to do is find them faster. And so what that can mean is a reduction in delays at the trial. One of the things that happened during COVID is we actually saw a burnout of healthcare professionals. I think we all saw this in the news and we heard about it. We have been living it, and for the last 5 years or so, this idea that there was a huge demand placed on our healthcare system, and a lot of people decided to exit that. What that has led to then is a constriction in the number of people available who are willing to conduct these clinical trials, and that means that we have a bottleneck. And so if we can then ease some of those points of bottleneck that exist at those clinical sites, at those physicians' offices, by instead of waiting until the end of the trial and then saying, here are 10 million data points that need to be collected, that need to be corrected, but rather each day sending them 3 or 4 that need to be adjusted, that they might need to look into, that maybe they'll remember that patient more quickly and what happened and why they might need to make a correction there. We're spacing it out and we're making it more timely. And so that's one of the key ways in which bringing this in a more timely way, which these processes allow us to do, as opposed to running some mass statistical problem or statistical algorithms, later or in batch or at the end at this big time crunch, can help us smooth that curve of this idea of data quality being rectified closer to the time when it happened.
Thank you. And another question that's come in from the people watching this, and thank you for those questions, by the way, trying to get through as many as we can. What advancements or trends do you foresee in the application of AI in drug development over the next 5 to 10 years?
Sky's the limit. If I could give you 6 months, I would be a genie at this point, right? Because it's, as I said before, it's moving so fast. So I didn't talk a ton about generative AI today. It's behind all of those processes that you saw, because that natural language processing and the way that we can conversationally interact with the customers and with the users of our system is a big part of it. But we're doing a lot of work right now in terms of refining medical specific large language models to be able to interact more natively with the data as it's coming in, to make more accurate predictions without having to even pre-program what we might be looking for, but letting them do some more exploratory work on their own. The same goal coming up, that we're able to surface those insights to our users. But I think the advancements that we're seeing in terms of medically accurate large language models is going to lead to even more breakthroughs right now. Saama has some of the most accurate large language models on the market in terms of medical specificity. It's the difference between having a model, for example, that's trained on just large publicly available data but non-specific, one trained for the law area, one that's trained for media, versus one that is medically trained and clinically relevant. So I think in all areas you're going to see a continued focus on that, on bringing more specificity that then allows more applicability of those models into the work that you're trying to do.
Okay, thank you. And time for just one more question from our audience. Asking if AI is more useful in your trials for one field rather than another. For example, has it been shown to be more successful in the realms of cancer treatment rather than Parkinson's?
Oh, it's a great question. So I'll say one of the big differentiators we see, and oncology is a great example, it really does go to amounts of data. And so, a big focus area of clinical trials actually is rare disease. And so, there's a different kind of emphasis that we need to bring. For example, when there's limited data collection, limited patients in a particular area, therefore we know less about them. We don't have those vast amounts of historic data to be able to help a trial like that versus an oncology trial where it's actually very easy to bring lots of new models based on the history of data, the vast amounts of data collection that we do in our oncology trial. And so, one of the things that I would love would be to see companies that focus on solving some of those tougher problems to crack around rare disease, around different therapeutic areas that don't have that vast amount of data collection. We have a lot of people that are focused on solving some of those problems that have a lot more data, specifically, oncology being a great example of it. And so I think there's going to be different solutions to each, but it's an area where I think that the explosion of technology possibilities is one where I'm really excited to see the potential advancements there.
Lisa, thank you so much. Judging by the response we've had, your keynote presentation and your answers there have sparked an awful lot of interest. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And so much of what Lisa had to say there, I think, resonates across the rest of industry, being customer focused. If ever there was an area where you have to be customer and outcome focused, it's of course in medical development. So Lisa, thanks a million.
Thanks very much, everyone.